We're waiting on a couple more, so I'll give them a minute or two. Morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
We did get responses from a couple more, so I'm just hanging on. It started in a minute or two. All right, well, I'm going to get started. We may have a couple pop in. So I want to welcome all of our chamber members this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you coming out to hear some of our advocacy efforts. I feel like I'm echoing. So I want to give time to our presenters. We have information for you today on the Corporate Transparency Act. Very happy to have Tom Sullivan with the U.S. Chamber with us. I actually participated in another presentation that Tom provided through our state chamber. He is the U.S. Chamber's Vice President of Small Business Policy. So we are going to have him go first and go through his information. Just so everybody is aware, this presentation is being recorded. Tom does have slides, which he has given us permission to share after today's session. So no need to write, quickly and take a bunch of notes, because we will provide Tom's slides after today. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Eileen. You could take a little nap because this is the same presentation. So, there are a few updates, and hopefully there'll be plenty of questions, and even more importantly, plenty of answers. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And now that we're sharing it, okay, here we go. It is great to be here with all of you this morning. And let's just jump right into it. And I guess this is the point where I should do the big disclaimer. I am trained as an attorney, but this cannot be construed as legal advice for a ton of reasons. One, I don't serve as an attorney at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, but even more importantly, I am not licensed to practice in Pennsylvania. But if you were in Massachusetts, where I grew up, or in Washington, D.C., where I am licensed to practice in both of those jurisdictions, I still can't have this advice being construed as legal advice. All right, so we get the legal disclaimer over with. Let's jump into a Corporate Transparency Act. Probably best place to start is, what the heck is it? Where did it come from? Have I been like Rip Van Winkle, asleep for several years, wake up and there's a new mandate or red tape that is facing me, and what happened? So this is not a new issue. This has been around for probably about 7 to 9 years. This idea of, how does the United States crack down on money laundering? It's really, it's that simple from a starting point. It gets complicated with the how, but the basic premise of this is the same reason when you go to a bank and you'd like to open a checking account, you have to show a driver's license and some proof, usually, that you are who you say you are. Sometimes that is with a utility bill that has the same address as your driver's license. There are various ways to show a bank you are who you are. Those requirements at a bank are called know your customer requirements. That is actually the same underlying reason why this Corporate Transparency Act exists. Now, this worked its way through the House and the Senate. Actually have the House Small Business Committee Chairman, Blaine Lukemeyer, a Republican from Missouri, actually supported this legislation. At the time, it was called the Beneficial Ownership Act, with really the desire to crack down on money laundering, in particularly terrorist money laundering, with some assurance from the government that this would not be painful for small businesses. And we'll get into a little bit why, unfortunately, that isn't the case. But like many things, it was started with good intention. And then we believe maybe it hasn't necessarily turned out that way, but at the starting point, it was a good intention. But please keep in mind the know your customer requirements for banks, because there is a parallel that has to do with whether or not you have to file things under the Corporate Transparency Act. So a couple of terms to know. I like to joke with people that I'm allergic to acronyms, but I am fully aware that Washington, D.C., if you want to either seem really smart or forward anything legislatively or administratively, it does seem as though you have to put an acronym to everything. And that's just no different from the Corporate Transparency Act. Of course, people are running around calling it the CTA. The same is true for different government offices. One in particular, FinCEN. I find it ridiculous that they just can't call themselves the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and have to resort to an acronym that honestly no one except for bankers is familiar with. But FinCEN, which is in fact the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is an office within the U.S. Treasury Department. Some of you may know, U.S. Treasury Department is the primary authority to crack down on money laundering, counterfeit money, etc. And so FinCEN is within the Treasury department. Now, beneficial ownership. The beneficial owners, as people are called in this law, that is someone who has 25% or more ownership interest in the company, or who exercises substantial control over the company. Now, there may be some questions about, oh, what is substantial control, et cetera. I approach this kind of the way I approach wetlands regulations. If you see a body of water that's wet all the time, chances are it's a wetland. Same is true really about beneficial owners. If someone has controlling interest, chances are they're a beneficial owner. And of course, another acronym, BOIR, Beneficial Ownership Information Report. That is actually what small businesses are required to report. What companies are supposed to report? Small businesses. Now, in this case, actually, FinCEN's done a decent job of simplifying which small businesses have to report. If a small business, to create itself, filed something with your Secretary of State, you have to report under the Corporate Transparency Act. It's really that simple. Now, the language, of course, has a big kind of caveat, or any similar office. There are different states that when you decide to start a business, like my wife did in Virginia, she filed paperwork with the Secretary of State. She also filed paperwork with our county, Fairfax County at the time, and that counts. But it is pretty straightforward. When you file it's not necessarily incorporation documents, although that does count, but any type of registration with your Secretary of State, that means you are covered. So what about the 23 exceptions that you don't report? Now, this is where we go back to the know your customer requirements. If you are a bank or financial company that, as part of its business, collects information about knowing your customer, you're exempt. And that's why I focused on how this is similar to know your customer requirements at banks, is that the lawmakers that created the Corporate Transparency Act, they realized, especially Congressman Lukemeyer, they realized that banks and financial service companies that collect this information already report to the Treasury Department, and it does no one any good that you would have to supplement or duplicate the same information again under the Corporate Transparency Act. Now, a big one for our friends in the Chamber of Commerce world. Nonprofits are not covered by the Corporate Transparency Act. Also, businesses that aren't small don't report. Incorporated entities with over 20 people and gross $5 million a year are exempt. Now, this last one is interesting. If you are a small business who not only belongs to the Tri-County Chamber, but for whatever reason you decided to join a small business advocacy organization run by my friend Todd McCracken. It's called the National Small Business Association. As long as you were a member of that group before March 1st, you're exempt. Now, you may wonder, well, why the heck did they get out of this? Well, Todd and his team filed a lawsuit as soon as the law was passed, challenging the law as unconstitutional. And they won. Now they won at the district court level, and they are appealing this decision. The government is appealing the decision, but the way that Todd's group, the National Small Business Association, got relief from the court says, hey, any small business that already belongs to your organization, they're exempt as of March 1st. Now, of course, after that judge made the decision, it didn't say all members are exempt forever, because honestly, Todd and the government did not want a bunch of people who are laundering money to all of a sudden become members of the National Small Business Association. So sometimes I have to explain the obvious. That one is probably pretty obvious. I'm proud of Todd and his lawsuit, and I think it's great that the small businesses who belong to NSBA are exempt. Now, getting into some of the nitty-gritty, and this is a place that I should probably insist, what I should have insisted right at the start. For the vast amount of small businesses, this might be a pain, but it's not hard. Where you go into a bank and you're in a rush, you just want to open up a checking account because your teenage son he's finally saved up enough money to buy a car, but you want to establish a checking account for your son or whatever. You're in a rush, you got so many things going, and you have to produce a driver's license and proof of where you live. At that moment, it's probably a real pain in the neck because you got all these other things. You only have 20 minutes set aside to open up this checking account. You waited in line at the bank. You have this paperwork to file, which seems ridiculous because you know the head of the bank, you know everybody that works at the bank, you've lived there your entire life, and it's a pain in the neck. But when 2 weeks later, when you look back at filling out what you had to fill out at the bank, you think, like, it really wasn't that hard. That's the same as what the Corporate Transparency Act and beneficial ownership information reporting should be like for the vast amount of small businesses, almost all small businesses. Now, if you have a complicated business structure, you have equity ownership, you have debt ownership, you have a real estate investment trust that owns part of your business. You have a number of investors who actually have the power to hire and fire employees of your business. All of those things make up a teeny tiny percentage of the small business community. They have complicated ownership structures. For those businesses, this is going to be hard. And I'll give the same advice that Eileen, me, and thousands of other chamber executives gave you when you were thinking about the employer retention tax credit. At that point, hire a professional who can walk you through beneficial ownership information requests. The agents that are available to help you with this, we will give you the same advice we did when many of us were struggling to figure out the employee retention tax credit. Go to your trusted advisor. Do not respond to a phone number that is stapled to a telephone pole while you're driving through town that says 1-800 corporate transparency. Call now. We'll give you a discount. Like, please don't do that. There are already scams out there about this, and I'll talk a little bit about some red flags. But if you have a complicated ownership structure, please go to your trusted advisor, whether it's a tax advisor, a legal advisor, or a combination between the two, and ask for help to file. Now, if you started your small business before this year, you've got all the way until New Year's Eve to file your beneficial ownership information report. If you're one of the millions record-breaking new businesses this year, you have 90 days after you filed something with your Secretary of State to file a beneficial ownership information report. Now, last but certainly not least, any change in ownership, which actually happens a lot for small businesses, you've got 30 days to update that change with FinCEN. Now, this is where it seems absurdly simple. So it's kind of reinforcing what most small businesses are going to have to file. Name of your company, doing business as, the address, and your tax ID number. Remarkably similar to what you file with your Secretary of State, and that is on purpose. They're looking, so when the enforcement folks are looking to get the bad guys, they look for things that don't match. If all of a sudden you have your doing business as, and it's a different address than what you filed with the Secretary of State, probably going to show up at FinCEN as a flag for folks to investigate. But the simplicity actually makes sense because this duplicates what you filed with your Secretary of State. Name, date of birth, address, and proof through government issued ID. Now, I should go back to the previous slide because there's two parts to this: your company and the beneficial owner. This is for the company. This is for the beneficial owner. So many small businesses will have more than one beneficial owner reporting with one company. There are actually tons of those beneficial owners who have many companies. I actually have not, I can count on my hand, on one hand, the number of small businesses I've met in 25 years of having the best job at the chamber advocating for small business. Less than 5 of those successful small business owners only have one company. So it is very likely you'll have multiple reports. Will not flag any type of investigation because that's perfectly normal. So here, oops. This is actually my favorite slide, which sounds really weird now that that came out of my mouth. But interesting tidbits. So first of all, you can get your own FinCEN ID. And this has always been a little bit of a head scratcher for me. Because I can't imagine one beneficial owner not being comfortable with another beneficial owner seeing their information. I've never met like a small business where 2 of the owners are operating in secret. That it doesn't make sense to me, but maybe it does exist, and that's why FinCEN said you can get your own ID that keeps your information confidential from your other owners that may be applying. Another one that has come up in these webinars, the question of whether creditors are beneficial owners, the answer is no. Your accountant or lawyer can file the beneficial ownership information reports. There are substantial fines that have kind of captured the interests of the political elite. So I just put that down here. This last bullet is important because of the scams. There is no charge to filing. I suspect that around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, you're going to see an influx of ads, maybe even pieces of paper stapled up on telephone poles saying they're going to give people a discount to file. Absolutely not. There is no filing fee for beneficial ownership information reports. Now, If none of this makes any sense to you, the good news is we have our small business digital platform called that is on the left part of this slide. We have an article that is updated regularly, and tells how to comply through the eyes and experience of small business owners. And then there are questions and answers from FinCEN that are also identified. And the deck that Eileen has will get you those URLs. I'll also put them in the chat in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing. Happy to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Tom? Go ahead, Beth Ann. How are you?
Good morning. Hi, Tom. Thanks for the information.
Sure.
I actually had sat through on we actually had a presentation meet at another business association, very similar. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the, not that I want to encourage people to take their time or not do it, but what do you think the actual likability is for them coming after businesses? What is it, the jail time and the fine, $10,000 and 3 years in jail? Like,
So my experience working with FinCEN is that these men and women take their job extremely seriously, and their failure to grant our requests for more time for small businesses to comply would indicate that small businesses should do everything possible to comply with their timelines.
and so as a small business then, and there's a lot of responsibility that falls into your lap as a small business, but sometimes there's no way of knowing all of this. So would you say that this is really, if you're working with a good tax person, this is also their responsibility to inform you because they should be informed of it? Yes? No?
All right. So I'm an attorney by training, so you got to be careful when you throw these words out like responsibility. So yes and no. So first of all, credit to attorneys and accountants who sent out with their packet of information leading up to tax season. If you're a small business, there is this law that you got to pay attention to. Some of them even put resources or a little one pager or whatever, but I give huge credit to all the tax providers about alerting the small business community to this new requirement. So they've done their work to kind of push that information out. But Beth, if you read the fine print, which is a lot of my job, all those service providers were very, very careful to say, this is on you. Like, this notice alerting you to it doesn't say, I've got to follow up with you to get this report done. I mean, they're very, and I mentioned before about FinCEN's rigidity in not granting longer time period. I think the accounting associations were frustrated that FinCEN did not give them like a safe harbor. Many of us in the policy world were really hoping that the accounting firms get a little bit of amnesty to say, like, if I do what I'd like to do and really bring in my clients to report and they don't, can you at least not come after me too? And FinCEN said, no, we're not giving third-party provider amnesty. We're not giving safe harbors. Like, no, this is on the small business community. We love you, accountants, and we're grateful, but we're not giving you amnesty. And I personally was a little disappointed with that. I was hoping that FinCEN would grant the accounting community some grace because they are going to do some heavy lifting on some pretty complicated, I've seen some pretty complicated business structures. And at the end of the day, these small business owners pay the accountant to set up these complicated business structures, and they're in the best position to report. So that's a long way of answering that. There's no safe harbor. There's no amnesty, but the accounting service providers have done a really good job of pushing out information. I think a big unknown is what the information push out is going to be like around Thanksgiving time. I haven't talked with AICPA, which is the Association for Accountants. They continue to be frustrated by FinCEN's rigidity. So I don't know. I think the accountants are in a tough bind because they want to help their clients, but they don't want to go so far as to be responsible for them not complying. Mr. Wellen asked what kind of issued ID. So driver's license, passport, yes. Social Security card, you need a picture ID. So I don't think a Social Security card's got to cut it. It's got to be a picture that relates to the that translates into the information provided. Other questions?
Anybody else have any other questions for Tom? Okay. Well, thank you, Tom.
Eileen,
joining
if you're going to mention Prove It Act and
Yes.
and the non-compete letter, could I stay on so that I can give a big shout out of what a difference it makes?
Sure. Why don't we do that quick before we go to the PA chamber? That way, if you want to hop off, you're free to do so. What Tom is talking about, we do get information from the US Chamber as well as the PA chamber. And when we do get those correspondence, they are typically looking, in most cases, for letters of support from state and local chambers to support correspondence that they're sending on regarding different legislation. So our board of directors recently at their May meeting, we agreed to sign on to a coalition letter urging House support of HR 7198, which is the Small Business Prove It Act, as well as we signed on to a coalition letter requesting delayed implementation of the Federal Trade Commission's non-compete ban. So this was just asking for more time for this to be evaluated and looked at. It wasn't actually stating yes or no to the whole thing, but it was asking for an extension for it to be reviewed. So Tom, sure, if you want to make any comments on those,
Sure.
please.
Well, it's just a thank you. It's not often where I'm able to tell small business owners and members of local chambers what a difference those letters, signing on to those letters makes, but it does. I mean, it makes a huge, huge difference. I work every day in Washington, D.C. with elected members and administration officials. And when they hear from you, that's what actually gets their attention. So thank you. Thank you for looking at it. Thank you for checking with your board of directors. And then ultimately, thank you for signing on. It makes a big difference.
Thank you, Tom. And again, we are grateful for the information we get from the U.S. Chamber. We're a small chamber. We don't have a dedicated advocacy person. So to get resources from not only your organization, but our state chamber that deal with advocacy issues, is a huge help to organizations like ours in staying true to our mission, which is to be an advocacy organization. But not necessarily having the resources to follow every piece. There's a lot going on. So
there is.
So thank you for that. It is our pleasure, and thank you for being that resource for not only us.
I only get to talk with you maybe once or twice a year, but Kevin Courtois, based out of Chicago, who is the top official for the region, I bring his gratitude as well. So
thank you.
Kev, it's wonderful dealing with you and working through Kevin to make sure to serve you. So take care, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Tom.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, for our second half hour, I want to thank Aaron Riggleman for jumping on. He is the manager of government affairs of the PA Chamber of Business and Industry. Just to mention it, the Tri-County Area Chamber of Commerce is not only a member of the U.S. Chamber, but also the PA Chamber of Business and Industry. So just as I mentioned with Tom, we appreciate the information that the PA Chamber pushes out to us. And one of the things we recently did with the PA Chamber and signing on for support as well was they did a coalition letter to urge the governor and General Assembly to eliminate Pennsylvania's penalty on startup businesses. So we did sign our name onto that letter of support as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to provide us some updates on other things the PA Chamber is working on. Thank you, Aaron. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me and for all of you for being here. I was trying to think about what I should talk about on this call. There's plenty going on here in Harrisburg, but since we're 2 days away from the longest month of the year, budget month here in Harrisburg, I figured I would lay the groundwork for what sort of we think we're going to hear over the next month or so, hopefully over the next month or so. Obviously, we know the budget didn't get done until December of last year, so we're optimistic at least we can beat that deadline this year. As you know, back in February, the governor unveiled his budget proposal for this year. It was top line spending of $48.3 billion. That's a 7% increase from the spending from last year. Based off of his own Department of Revenue estimates and the Independent Fiscal Office, if we were to spend that much money and continue that spending trend, by 2026, our reserve fund would be out of money, and by 2028, our rainy day fund will be out of money. So you can, as you can imagine, more fiscally conservative Republicans, particularly Senate Republicans, have really pushed back on this proposal, just purely from the spending number. Obviously, we know businesses pay the outsized portion of taxes here in the Commonwealth, and so we're also mindful of spending that much money in any given fiscal year. As for the main parts of his budget proposal, a large chunk was basic education funding. The Commonwealth Court recently deemed the way we fund schools to be unconstitutional. This has sort of set off a fight on how to go about addressing that. The governor is proposing $1.1 billion this year for K through 12, and 5.1 over the next 7 years. It's important to note that in the governor's proposal, he does not include that 5.1 billion over the next 7 years in his out years, and so there's actually some belief that our rainy day fund would be out much sooner had he included those numbers. So that'll be one of the bigger fights that we see this year in the budget. The second big component of the governor's budget was his economic development plan. It's calling for an array of different programs aimed at developing businesses in the Commonwealth. Most notably, and something that we support, $500 million for shovel-ready sites. This is something that could help businesses of all sizes. We know how much capital it takes to develop lands to open up a business here in Pennsylvania. And so this $500 million can help kickstart that. We're appreciative of that. But I'll sort of touch on economic development, our perspective on it here in a little bit. But wanted to note that the governor's proposal also has a couple of new revenue streams, including the legalization of recreational marijuana. There has not been a legislative push on this front yet this session. It'll be yet to see if the governor prioritizes that this year. Obviously, from a business community perspective, we don't have an opinion on marijuana one way or the other, but what we know is that businesses are stuck in a really challenging liability landscape when we legalize marijuana. Who does the liability fall on if an employer is operating a forklift, they test positive for marijuana after the fact, but they're taking it legally? Is the business bear the responsibility of that? Are they able to drug test still? These are questions that we would like to see answered before we see any expansions to the marijuana program. There's a bill in the Senate by Senator Stefano it works to address some of this. So that's our priority on the marijuana front. Also, of course, the governor has called for a $15 minimum wage, $9 for tipped employees. We know that has an extreme impact on small businesses. The House actually passed a similar version, but their version actually has inflation accelerator. So every year inflation goes up, and the wage goes up. That's a non-starter, I think, to us and the rest of the business community. But I do think that that'll be part of the conversation this year on minimum wage between the Senate and the government. As for what the Senate is prioritizing during this public discussion, I'm sure all of you have seen by now, a couple of weeks ago, the Senate passed a reduction in the personal income tax from 3.07 to 2.8%, as well as eliminating the gross receipts tax on electricity. So obviously the PIT to small businesses is a big deal. We're happy that the chamber is happy that the Senate chamber is prioritizing business tax reform. But this is sort of where I want to pivot into our chamber priorities. Elaine mentioned our coalition letter we're working on. You know, Tom had way more acronyms than I have, but one we use is NOLs, and that's net operating losses. We coined this the tax on Pennsylvania startup businesses. And the reason for this is it's sort of a niche policy area, but all of you as business people know, in year one of starting a business, you almost always lose money. Year two, you lose money. Year three, you break even. If you're lucky, in year four, you're making money. At the federal level and 48 other states, you can deduct more than 40 or 80% or more of those losses onto a profitable year to pay less in taxes, allowing you the opportunity to reinvest some of that capital into your business and make more money. But in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, they're the only two states that cap that at 40%. So you can imagine as a business that's looking to locate, looking to expand, or somebody who's starting a business, how Pennsylvania is really shooting themselves in the foot with this tax provision. They're allowing right off the top 40% less deductions on your taxes. And so this has been the number one priority of ours this year, is making sure that 40% is raised to 80%. The Kauffman Foundation does a study every year of entrepreneurship on new businesses per state. And Pennsylvania is dead last, tied with West Virginia, 50 out of 50 in entrepreneurship. We know that Pennsylvania has been a beacon of industry for, since our inception, whether it be steel, and we know that there's an opportunity now with a lot of new tech businesses like robotics and AI and so on. These businesses cost a lot of money up front, and Pennsylvania is not setting themselves up well to be a state that's looked at for these investments. And it's not even us asking to go above and beyond. It's asking us to get to the level that 48 other states are at, which is why it's a priority of ours. And that sort of goes back to the governor's economic development plan, which is we're proud that the governor and both chambers are acknowledging that Pennsylvania is uncompetitive, but we also know that businesses are looking for long-term tax relief. So in partnership with the governor's plan, we hope that both chambers understand we need NOL provisions that allow long-term investment. Businesses are not just looking at getting established in Pennsylvania, they're looking at when we're established in Pennsylvania, what are the things that are going to lead to success for us? NOLs is one of those. The second key chamber priority is permitting reform. It's something we talk about ad nauseum. Everybody has their horror stories. The Senate last year passed the bipartisan support Senate Bill 350. It does a couple of things. First, it establishes timelines for every license, certificate, permit that the government offers, which is about 2,000. And it allows them to be trackable to the applicant. We often say, you order a Domino's pizza, you can track it from the oven to your front door, and yet we have multi-billion-dollar permits, and applicants have absolutely no idea where it is in the process. The second thing it does is it says, much like when you take your car to get inspected, you don't have to take it to PennDOT, you take it to a mechanic that's been, reviewed and deemed as qualified to review the car for safety. Why do we not do that for permits? And we have tremendous engineering firms that have the ability to relieve some of the burden that particularly DEP is facing here at the state level. So we should allow these third parties to review permit applications. And then the third component, the governor is offering money back if the application fee, if you don't receive an up or down by the timeline is done. But what we've said is that's a good start, but businesses want their permit. They're missing out on opportunities and months and years of potential revenue sources. So if the government agency is not able to give you a yes or no on the timeline, then your permit application should be deemed approved from that point forward, and you should be able to continue on whatever it is you're applying for. So those are our two big priorities for this year. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I wanted to touch on a couple bills that I think are of particular importance to the business community. As you know, for the first time in 12 years, we have a new majority in the House. And this year, there's been dozens and dozens of bills that have been really challenging for the business community. I'm pretty confident that this is the most anti-business chamber we've had in a very long time. Taking votes on bills that are vetoed by the governor of California and New York, and passing in our chamber here in Pennsylvania. So I wanted to touch on a couple that are currently sort of boiling. The first is House Bill 98. We've coined this the equal pay law weaponization. As many of you know, as business people, equal pay for equal work has been the standard for at the federal level for a long time, but there's been exceptions because we understand that there are multiple things that factor into determining the salary for somebody. But House Bill 98 would essentially gut the exceptions to the equal pay law and also change the standard from equal pay for equal work to equal pay for similar work. So you can imagine how that is an ambiguous standard for business that opens them up to a tremendous amount of liability. This bill also allows for private causes of action for businesses sued for their actions by their employees, and just really opens up a can of worms that's challenging for the businesses to navigate. The second, House Bill 1773. This is a bill that we anticipate will not receive a vote in the House. We're pretty confident we can bottle it up. But this has been coined by the sponsors the fair share tax plan. But what it would do is actually raise business taxes from 3.07 to 12%. Their stated goal of this is to ensure that the quote unquote rich pay their fair share. But we all know that small businesses and owners are often far from rich. When you pay the PIT as a business, for business operations, that's not wealth, that is not rich. And it certainly shouldn't be sending our small businesses to quadruple their taxes in a time when they're suffering most. This bill received a hearing before the subcommittee on tax for the House Finance Committee a couple of months ago. It was sponsored by, I think, about 8 House members, particularly from the Southeast. But I like to bring this up, not because I want to fear you into believing this is moving, but believe that legislators who put out this idea that we should quadruple small business taxes deserve to hear from small businesses and on the impacts that it could have on local communities, local businesses. I mean, I think we would all agree quadrupling small business taxes will put out of business the majority of Pennsylvania employers. And that's certainly not something we want to even be talking about as we try and become more competitive. And then the last bill, on a much more positive note, I'm sure all of you have experienced this, something we've heard anecdotally, and this is people, unemployment compensation, work requirements to seek a job. We've heard anecdotally, especially since COVID, where businesses are devoting their time to set out applications for applicants to apply for a job. They set up the interview, they use their time and resources, and then the people don't show up because they're not interested in actually interviewing for the job or getting the job. They're simply trying to check the box. And so this bill, Senate Bill 1109, would deem anybody ineligible for unemployment compensation if they're deemed to be sort of manipulated the process by simply booking interviews without actually completing them. So a step in the right direction, and I know something that is appreciated across the business spectrum. It's important to note that one of those bills that I mentioned that was vetoed by Governor Newsom in California was unemployment compensation for striking workers. We as business people understand how ludicrous that is. When people are voluntarily going on strike, they're not eligible for unemployment compensation. That seems counterintuitive. That passed the House earlier this year. It was offered as an amendment to this bill in the Senate and was very pointedly struck down, voted down. So we believe that concept is dead to this session, which we're pushing about. So that is a very quick, very quick synopsis of what is happening in Harrisburg. We anticipate those chambers are in session every week this upcoming month in June. We'll see a lot of movement, a lot of rumors, and a lot of things going on. And certainly know that we're trying to keep you all updated the best we can. But we're confident we can get some resolutions reforms done this year. And certainly we'll keep you updated. But happy to answer any questions on the budget or what we're hearing or any issues that I didn't touch on, or things that might be impacting your business that you want.
Great, Aaron. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Aaron?
I have a simple one, Aaron. Thanks. That was a really great, comprehensive presentation. There's a lot of information really quickly. By any chance, do you have that in print that you could share with everybody, just like the last presentation and slides?
I can send you information. We have one-pagers on each of our priorities, and then we also did a summary of the governor's proposal and sort of our talking points related to that. I can re-up that to Eileen to share with you guys if that works.
That would be awesome. I'm sure everybody on here would appreciate it. It was a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, Aaron, if you want to pass that along, we'll send it with the other information that we're sending from Tom. Real quick, I just wanted to comment on two things. One, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, there is also a presentation Zoom meeting session that the PA Chamber is offering on Wednesday, June 12th from 10:30 to 11:30. Expanded overtime, how the updated Department of Labor rule impacts employers. I know as a nonprofit organization, this is something that we've been following. It's been around and around for a while. So I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on. Is this something that our members are able to attend as well? Because we'll send that out for their consideration.
Yeah, I actually forgot to mention that. It was on my talking list, but yes, as you mentioned, the Department of Labor at the federal level has ruled, an expansion to the overtime eligibility for salaried workers. If you remember a couple of years ago, Governor Wolf had tried to do it at the state level. We successfully pushed back with that. This has a tremendous impact on nonprofits, on higher education institutions, and we're still trying to work our way through what the implications are and what the next steps are. This is a webinar, as you mentioned, June 12th, that is available through Tri-County's membership of the PA Chamber, not only available to you, Eileen, but also all of your members. So just make sure you register so you get there.
What was the date again? June what?
June 12th from 10:30 to 11.
Thank you.
I'll include that in our post email as well. Does anybody have any questions for Aaron? I don't see anything in the chat. Actually, the link to that session is in the chat as well. So the one thing I did want to comment on, I'm not sure how many people are aware, we try and inform people as they join the organization and have shared it in other advocacy conversations. We do have a joint membership with the PA Chamber. So if you are a member that has 1 to 10 employees as a small business, when you join Tri-County, you also get a membership in the PA Chamber of Business and Industry. So if you need more information on that, we also have a 1-page flyer on that and what those benefits look like. So if you're not aware of that, please let me know and we can send you some additional information. And I can connect you with Aaron, who might connect you to somebody else, that can help you through that process or to learn more. We send them an updated membership list on an ongoing basis. So you should receive a newsletter, an email newsletter that they send out, just sharing information on what the PA Chamber is working on. I know I also just recently had a session with the chamber representatives or employees that work on that program. So they are looking to make some modifications possibly in the new year. So as we would get that information, we would also share it with our members that would be impacted by that as well. And then my only other thing, if there are no other questions, Aaron did mention medical marijuana. So we are actually having a business impact. We're kind of adding a tagline to our economic development luncheon this year. It'll be on November 14th. We're actually going to have a panel presentation trying to cover some topics that are of interest to our business community. That impact of medical marijuana and what that does to employment situations. We are having a speaker on that. One of my colleagues is working on connecting me with the right person. We're also having someone speak on childcare, also another big issue impacting our employers. And our third presentation will be the director of the Montco Works, the Montgomery County Workforce Investment Board. There's training dollars out there that some of our businesses may not be aware of. So want to give her the floor to share some of that information with you and where you might be able to retrain some people, etc., and not have to take on those expenses. There might be resources for you to take part in that. So just wanted to share those couple of things. One last call. Any questions for Aaron? Okay. Perfect timing. Alice will help me in getting out a post event email with all of the information that we promised that we would follow up with. Again, thank you, Aaron, for taking the time to join some of our Tri-County Chamber members. Thank you to all of you who joined the call. Again, we are an advocacy organization. We don't have necessarily a full-time person looking at all of this. So we value the memberships we have in the U.S. Chamber, the PA Chamber, with people like Beth Ann, from legislators' offices. So if there is something that you are hearing, something you want more information on, this is your chamber. Please don't hesitate to reach out and we can help connect you to the right resource. So, okay. Again, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day. See you soon.
Thank you to you for putting this together. Have a great day.
Thank you.